Well, good evening, folks. How are you? This is Preacher Man Piper, old Doc Hatfield, coming to you, telling you another story about my life. Many years ago, I had a Baptist church call me and ask me to come and preach a revival. And I started on Sunday, and I preached Sunday morning and then Sunday night. Back at this time, uh, in the mid 70s, there was a lot of different denominations that were talking about speaking in tongues. And a lot of these different denominations weren't just talking about the gift of tongues, but they were talking about how to do it. So you'd have one denomination say eight easy lessons on speaking in tongues. You'd have another one say 10 easy lessons. You'd have another one say 12 easy lessons. Well, I went to this church, and on Sunday morning I preached, and on Sunday night I preached against that. And so after the service was over, we went out to eat, and there were several people sitting around the table, and just about the time we was finished eating, everybody got up except for me and the pastor. And we were sitting there, and he looked at me and he said, I don't know how to do this. I said, well, do whatever, what is it you need to do? And he said, well, we've canceled the revival. I said, you've canceled it? He said, yeah. And reached in his pocket and he handed me an envelope. I opened the envelope and there was $600 in it. And I said, why are you giving this to me? I said, after all, I just preached today. And he said, well, we figured that we ought to pay you what we would have paid you if you'd been here all week. And I said, well, is it because of me that you've done this? And he said, well, and then as I was saying this and thinking, after I said that, was it me that did it? I said, wait a minute. Are you teaching 8 or 10 or 12 easy lessons on speaking in tongues in your church? And he said, well, what of it? And I said, well, that's the reason you're canceling it, because I preached against it. And he said, well, I said, oh, hold it, wait a minute. I said, I think I made history here. He said, how do you think you made history? I said, I think I'm the first evangelist to be fired from preaching a revival. I said, this will make news. I said, so thank you. I said, plus get paid for it. I said, now if I could just figure out a way to do this at every revival, just preach the first Sunday and then get fired and get paid for it, I said, I'd be doing good. I wouldn't have to preach much and I'd be getting good money. And he just got up and walked away. Well, I got up and I left. I was staying in the home of one of their members. So I thought, well, I guess I need to go, because this was late at night. This was probably 9:30, 10 o'clock. I said, well, I guess I better go over there, and I better just pack up my stuff, and then I'll just politely leave. So I went back to this house, and I walked in, and the lady of the house said, preacher, did they cancel the revival? I said, yes, they did. And I said, and I just pack my stuff up and then I will leave. She said, no, 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 no. Her husband come in and said, no, sir. No, sir. Don't be packing up tonight and leaving. No, sir. Said, you wait till in the morning to leave. And said, we'll fix you a nice breakfast in the morning. We don't want you to leave tonight. Well, I really didn't want to leave that night because it was a long way home. And I didn't want to be driving that late, especially after preaching 2 services that day. So I stayed. The next morning I got up and went in there, and they had a nice breakfast that they were preparing. And I sat down at the table, and they brought me a cup of coffee, and the lady said, sir, would you mind talking to a couple of people that are on their way over here now? And I said, well, what about? Well, I would rather them tell you, but said, first of all, we want to tell you we really loved that message last night. Said, we've been against what they're doing, but said, we didn't know what to do. Said, you laid them open just like filleting a fish. And I said, well, last place I would have thought would have been an independent fundamental Baptist church teaching 12 easy lessons on how to speak in tongues. Well, while we were having breakfast, this couple came. And they introduced me to them, and so they sat down with us and got a cup of coffee. And this man looked at me and he said, sir, may I ask you, how much do you charge to preach a revival? And I said, well, I just have to tell you now, you can't afford me. And he said, what? I said, you can't afford me. Well, he said, we were afraid of that. Said, we can't get anybody to preach a revival at our church because we can't come up with enough money. I said, well, you see, here's the thing about it. My boss pays me. You don't have to worry about paying me. My boss pays me. And they looked at me funny and they said, who's your boss? I said, God. God pays me. I said, he takes care of every need, everything I need. He never lets me go without. And they said, well, the other thing is, in Jamestown, which was just 12 miles away, we have a little Assembly of God church. We're not running very many people, but we feel like we really need a revival. Would you consider coming Wednesday night and preaching at our church? And I said, well, first of all, do you know what I preached last night? Yes, we heard what you preached last night. And hey, we're all for it. I said, well, I'll come, but I said, I'll just preach the gospel. They said, well, that's what we want. I said, okay, I'll come. So I went over there and preached on Wednesday night, and all of them wanted me to stay through Sunday night. So I did. I stayed through Sunday night. Then they all wanted me to stay for another week. I stayed for another week. Then they all wanted me to stay for another week. I stayed for that week. Then they wanted me to stay for the third week, and I stayed for that week. Now, in that period of time, that church was running not too many people, about 12 or 13 people. And here now, there were over 300 people coming to the revival. Had many people saved and joined the church and was baptized. Many of them. And so when the revival was finally over, they came to me and handed me a big manila envelope. They said, we have no idea what's in it, but this is what we've got to give you. I said, do you need this money? They said, no. Our church now has over 250 people in it. We're thrilled beyond measure. I said, well, I'm glad you did. I'm glad you did. And I said, uh, uh, I have had one of the best times I've ever had preaching in your church. And they said, well, we didn't know how you would take it with us being Assembly of God. I said, let me tell you something. I'm out to win people to the Lord Jesus Christ. I'm out to preach the gospel. I said, I don't care if it's in a Catholic church. If they'll let me preach the gospel, I'll preach in one. I don't care. And they said, well, said we've had quite a few preachers come and said they'd be interested in you preaching revivals in their churches. I said, well, I'll do it. I'll do it. I said, have them get a hold of me and I'll put them on the itinerary. So, because I was willing to go to a completely different denomination, they believed in speaking in tongues, but they believed it was a gift from God. It wasn't something to be learned. They did not try to do all of that while I was there. They were interested in people being saved. And many people came to know the Lord. And so I told them, I said, I'm thrilled to death that God has blessed you, blessed your church this way, but God has sure blessed me by being here. So that's my story on Jamestown, Arkansas. Now, you can't ask me anything about that church now. I've never been back. But I know that when I left at that time, that it was doing great things and that God was really blessing there. So that's the story of that, and I hope that you like that. And I'll be back again with another story, and I hope it will bless your hearts. But in the meantime, I pray God will help you. God will bless you, shower His grace upon you, supply your every need, and take care of every circumstance. So till I see you again, enjoy your pipes, enjoy your tobacco, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.